But, I mean, the Austrian argument, I think, is not that there's no state involved in money. I mean, even if you look at, if you count sort of primitive tribes as even worse than modern governments, which I think they were in terms of dominance and authority. And I did this whole speech on Aboriginals in Australia. I would much rather live under a modern Western government than a, quote, non-state government, a non-state authoritarian tribal system like the Aborigines. But I think the argument from the Austrians is something like, well, look, the government was at one point restrained by a gold standard. You guys know all of this, right? And so it couldn't just create money out of thin air because the money would lose value relative to gold and the hyperinflation and all of that. Whereas if the government is not constrained by tying its money creation to any fixed resource or limited resources, then you get massive amounts of spending. And listen, I mean, the argument, don't want to argue both sides, but the argument against that is, and I think people have said this, and I think it's a fair question towards the Austrians, is like, okay, so like 40% of all US money that's ever been created has been created since COVID. Where's the hyperinflation? Now, people say, well, inflation is high. It's like, yeah, but it's not Weimar high. And so that is an interesting question. And I've heard the Austrian arguments since the 80s about how, well, all of this money creation, we're off the gold standard, Nixon, 1971, and it's hyperinflation is right around the corner, and you got to get some food in the basement and so on. And while there certainly has been inflation, my gosh, I mean, it's no question, right? When I first came to Canada,
Weimar. It's not been Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it's not Weimar or Zimbabwe, and the Austrians. I haven't delved deep into their arguments, and I'm sure that they have arguments against that. But the amount of money that's being created has been truly staggering. The amount of debt is truly staggering. And yet now they can say, yes, well, the fact that you haven't got lung cancer yet doesn't mean lung cancer isn't bad for you. And it's like, but that really wasn't the prediction as much. The prediction was that inflation was going to follow 18 months or so after the money creation. The money has been created in levels that von Mises could scarcely conceive of. And yet the hyperinflation has not hit. And I think that may be a flaw in the general theory.
So I think that the MMT's theory on inflation is more nuanced than that. So, for example, when we were on our call in 2021, I did say that because of these large deficits, the MMT theory would tell us that we're probably going to see higher levels of inflation. And I think I even I said about 5 to 10% for the coming years. I also have to add that I did not know that the Russia-Ukraine conflict was going to break out in February. That was a huge inflation factor. These are always, there's way more than monetary factors that cause inflation. Inflation, by the way, being defined as an increase in the aggregate price levels, just to be clear on my definition.
Which is not the Austrian, right? The Austrian is increasing money supply.
I know. Yeah. You started by saying that the Austrians believe that the Austrians that the Austrians agree with the state theory of money to some extent, and I don't think that is the case. The original regression theorem by von Mises and I think Böhm-Bawerk also, it does not have a state in the origination theory of money. It has atomistic individuals bartering with one another.
Yeah, whether they're using seashells or salt, like there's some medium.
Exactly.
And I accept all of that, but certainly all modern economies, it's state-based. Sorry, go ahead.
So that is a big, a fundamental difference between the MMT approach to money and the Austrian approach to money. And a lot of the ensuing disagreements stem from this huge difference in the respective theories on the origins of money.
But sorry, why would that matter insofar as it's all controlled by the state now in every square inch on the planet, except maybe Antarctica? Help me understand why that would make a big difference.
Because the Austrians have a theory as to how do we go back to the best possible free market money system. Let's do a gold standard, because as we all know, money came from individual exchanges and people chose to use gold in the free market of money. And so the best reflection of that system would be a national gold standard. That is the theory that is where they end up by starting with this money regression theorem theory, and that is a theory that I
Oh,
completely
so it's sort of
disagree
like,
with.
I hate to sort of put it this way, but it's sort of like a noble savage theory that we originated with gold and silver, and we need to get back to that. I don't, I mean, personally, I don't care as an ANCAP. I don't care how money is defined. I just don't want it to, I don't care who gets married. Let's just not rape each other. Right. And so
Right.
for me, it's like, I don't care how the money is solved or sorted, whether it's a bimetallic thing. I don't think it would be. I think it would be some combination of maybe commodity-backed digital currency or Bitcoin, of course, which we should touch on
Yeah.
before we stop talking.
Yeah.
I don't care how currency is maintained, because I would never in my wildest dreams imagine that I knew how a currency should be best created, maintained, transferred, I mean, protected from inflation, and yet at the same time, stable and fungible and all of that kind of stuff. I have no idea. I mean, obviously, we all have some ideas, but one of the fundamental things about ANCAP is you are a vainglorious fool if you think that you can replace the combined genius of the free market with all these brilliant souls searching for ideal solutions. You can't do it. It's not possible. It would be like me saying I'm going to build my own computer, and not from components, but from like raw materials like sand and water, stuff like this. It's not going to happen, right? I mean, I can't even make a pencil, as that sort of famous old article goes. And so if they say, well, this is the solution, I think that would be a violation of basic market principles. The whole point of, because gold silver would be central planning and saying this is the best way to do it. And of course, there was no such thing as digital currencies or even really computers back in von Mises' day. So the idea that it would be gold and silver would be a throwback, and I think would be a substitution of individual preference based on noble savage routines rather than letting the market decide.
Making a gold standard creates an arbitrary objective of subsidizing a particular gold price. That is a very esoteric, unpractical, ideological objective to pursue. By the way, also, it's often been pursued by banking lobbies. If you read Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, he describes how the banking lobby in the 1800s and 1900s has occasionally pushed for a gold standard because they thought that it would restrain the government from running deficits and keep inflation low, and that they earn fixed income, and so they're interested in keeping inflation low. That's generally their bias. On the other hand, also, by the way, I don't know if people keep talking about Weimar Germany. I don't know if they're aware that Weimar Germany was on a gold standard when when it went through hyperinflation. So I think that's kind of a dispute, that you optimize or you keep inflation low by having a gold standard, because inflation is impacted by so many other important factors, resource availability, in
World War
particular.
One, yeah.
World War One, exactly. French coming in from the West and exploiting coal at gunpoint. These are things that cause hyperinflation. Zimbabwe doing a land reform that demolished its entire agricultural sector. That will give you a hyperinflation, but not some. And by the way, Zimbabwe's hyperinflation happened during one of the few years where the government was running a surplus. Just to, I looked that up recently because I had a debate on Twitter with someone about that.
I want Nima to finish that point, so I don't want to step on that point. Was there another previous point you wanted to hit on while he's finding his computer charger?
Well, if he wants to talk about the Weimar thing, I mean, the Weimar thing was subsequent to, the most massive intervention to date in Western history of the government into the freedoms and free market of the society, which is the First World War.
I mean, it has been fashion.
Well, no, the First World War. The First World War was a massive, of course, staggering expansion of state power and slaughter of state actors, citizens. And again, the argument is something like, well, if they'd been restricted by fiat currency, if they hadn't switched over to fiat currency sort of halfway through the war, as happened in a lot of places to sort of make up money or selling bonds, then the war would have ended when they ran out of gold, which would have been a whole lot earlier than
my understanding, and this actually comes from reading Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley, because he goes into some pretty significant detail on this, is that before World War I, roughly speaking, the like gold to reserve ratio at a country was something like 1 to 3. If I'm remembering this correctly. And by the end of the war, it turned into something like 1 to 10, right? And part of the economic disaster that came into existence after that was the fact that everybody after World War I, for whatever reason, was obsessed with getting the number back to 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 10, instead of just accepting the fact that the world had moved on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different story. The point that I wanted to make is this. Wait, am I still on?
Yep.
Okay. The videos moved around. Nima's rebooting. The point that I wanted to make
I like
is
how
that
he's so identified with his tech. It's not even he's rebooting his phone. Nima himself is. I'm just go on.
Yes, in theory, that restricts the government. But for whatever reason, when a war happens, they always seem to figure some way around it.
Yeah.
Because they did have a gold standard in World War I, and they just kept stretching it out. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, going back to the Nixon thing, I think this is an interesting point that Warren Mosel actually made, is that everybody points to, I think it's 1971 that Nixon nixed the gold standard.
That's why they say the wage stagnation kicked in and so on. Yeah.
Well, that he nixed the international gold standard. The domestic gold standard was nixed in 1933.
Right.
By FDR.
FDR, yeah. And he had the forced buyback, yeah.
Right. And Mosel's argument is that was a much more impactful situation on the gold standard, because between 33 and 71, no one ever internationally demanded money back until I think it was France demanded the money back or demanded gold back with further money. And that's when Nixon was like, we're not giving them that gold back. I'm nixing that. Right. So the point that I'm trying to make is that when a government wants to go to war and kill everybody, they're really good at figuring out how, even if they we put some arbitrary restraints in yesterday. Let's get rid of them today because we want to go to war.
If everybody who's watching this now or recording could like, share, and subscribe it helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it's just true.